Welcome to Neurodivergent Faith, a podcast to help you navigate the beautiful and complicated intersection of neurodivergence and Christian faith and practice. My name's Josh Davis. I'm autistic, ADHD, a spiritual director, and an ordained pastor. And I'm delighted to have you join me as we explore the unique ways neurodivergent people experience God, worship, community, and scripture, along with special interests, sensory and attention differences, social and communication challenges, and much more. All right, well, welcome back to Neurodivergent Faith. This is season 5. It's hard to believe we're already in season 5. And today I'm delighted to welcome again the person who's been on the podcast the most officially, Robin. This will be the 4th episode.
Yay.
So welcome, Robin Tate. Can you just take a moment to introduce yourself? And if people haven't met you already through the podcast, what would they need to know about you?
Well, first I have to say what a great compliment that is. Thank you for having me on so many times. I enjoy being here and chatting with you always. I am a neurodiverse couples coach and a life coach to people that have autism and ADHD. And I'm neurodivergent myself. I'm trying to think of all the things people would want to know that are interesting. But I think that's a contributing author to 2 books now with Dr. Stephanie Holmes. So that's exciting and fun part of what I do.
And am I remembering right that you have a new book coming out later this year?
So Dr. Stephanie also released a book, and I was able to contribute to that. And it's released. It pre-ordered early in June. And right before we got on, I was like, oh, I better look and see, did this release? So it's available for order now, at least on Amazon. It was published through Future Horizons, but the name of the book is Autistic Voices in Education, Dismantling Obstacles and Overcoming Bridges. So I think the exciting part about this book is that, well, one, the audience is very different than the book I contributed to for Dr. Holmes last time. It's for education, and she has a nice collection of people who are neurodivergent who have contributed to the book. So really just giving voices, quite a few of them very successful people who are autistic or autistic and ADHD and are contributing and advocating for children, right, in education and helping, teachers and LEAs and all of the members, and just really considering, where are we going in education? And it's forwarded by Dr. Temple Grandin, who, from what I understand, is really talking a lot right now about the transition from education, the education system, K through 12, into college or trades or after, and what does that look like, and what's happening for young adults as they leave high school, and what is happening, because that's a huge drop-off point where services aren't maybe being provided, or, it's almost like, well, you did have autism and ADHD in high school and we considered it, but now you're grown up. And
Right.
So on to work with you and you should be fine. My specific chapter talks about accommodations and not just the challenges of applying accommodations for teachers, which is addressed, with empathy, but the legal part, and then really, why are we doing it, and what does it, how should it be done well to really benefit children as they're developing, from a young age through high school. So it's exciting stuff. It's nice to give a voice to things that I've experienced and needed and didn't receive, I think, wished I had received as a young person.
Yeah, I find that so much of what I get to do in my life is provide spaces that I wish had existed when I was younger, or for example, this podcast is even like, what would I have loved to have listened to when I was first starting my neurodivergent understanding of myself and then becoming diagnosed? Like, how would it have been helpful to talk with other people early on in that process as I was reconciling my faith and my brain wiring, right? Yeah, I think that's a really powerful motivator. And also, I think there's some redemption in it, that when we get to be part of a change, there's some redemption in our own stories of maybe even some of the pain and struggle that we've gone through can get transmuted into something beautiful. And So I honor the work that you're doing with that chapter in the book. And thanks for being here and being willing to talk about, as always, we talk about executive function. And I have been loving this conversation. So today we've talked about the first 8 characteristics together in previous episodes. So if you're listening and you haven't heard us talk about them, go back and look for any episode with Robin Tate. And we're talking executive function and faith. We've talked about response inhibition, working memory. We've talked about self-regulation or emotional regulation, task initiation, sustained attention, planning and prioritization, organization, and time management. And today I'm hopeful that we'll be able to talk about flexibility, metacognition or self-awareness, persistence, perseverance, self-motivation in that category. And then lastly, stress tolerance, resilience. So let's start with flexibility. And in the book, Uniquely Us, where you're a contributing author, you say flexibility is both cognitive and behavioral. It is the ability to shift or change plans when something unexpected happens, or if someone introduces a different perspective or has a new plan. So let's imagine and let's think of scenarios from our own lives or others that we know where this has come in contact with faith environment of church or Bible study, or maybe faith in connection with God on a personal level. Yeah. What comes to your mind when you think of flexibility?
Oh, wow. I mean, if this was I think this is one of those most obvious ones when we think about the church community. So as a strength, there's this deep faithfulness and conviction that you see with cognitive flexibility, right? Because once I know this thing, then I believe this thing, that's it. And so I see that part when you think about it as that strength, the firm believer who's holding on to truth. And also there's that person that maybe you're working with, or in ministry with us, or in just even a Bible study with, and their answer is always no matter what you ask, no matter what, it's just a no. And then maybe a few weeks out or a few days later, even, it's a maybe. They come back after having processed the information, and they're like, well, if we did it this way or if we did it that way, it's a possibility. But with cognitive inflexibility, which, research didn't really show when I was looking into this chapter, that there is more ADHD or autistic executive functions, which kind of people think there are. I even thought that we would find that there were. And this is one of the ones I thought, oh, this one will be more of a challenge for autistic people than.
I thought too.
Yeah. So I still wonder if that just hasn't been proven by research, because it was like a gut punch. I really thought that that's what the research would show. But in the research I read, unless there's been something a little bit newer, it didn't. But generally speaking, that I will say that is what I see. And it can also look like bulldozing or hard to work with. I think cognitive inflexibility gets a little bit of a bad rap until you understand what's happening on the inside of the person, and the reality that it's usually rooted in this very complex, it's not one process that's kind of causing it. It's like challenges with regulation, challenges with processing speed, challenges with so many thoughts happening at one time. And, if I have created the system to make sure that I can cope with all this internal stuff that's happening for me, then when there's this interruption, it's so logical that you would say no. And that's perceived as inflexibility, or rigidity is an even heavier. I'd much rather hear flexibility than rigidity, but.
Or it might even be read as, wow, they're a my way or the highway kind of person. And, from outward appearances, that makes sense. That could be what's happening. But when you get underneath it, you actually realize, oh, there's actually so many sensory things they're considering, so many other needs that they're considering. And there's fear that if it doesn't go my way, it's not my way so that you're excluded. It's my way so that I can hopefully stay present and stay regulated, right?
Yeah.
And when you begin to understand that, then you can receive it differently. But that can be hard to work with, especially I've met a number of leaders who were my way
Hmm.
or the highway kind of people, and you feel like there's not room for you in that kind of
Yeah.
an environment.
Yeah. Yeah. And yet, when I was thinking through this, there there's also this part where it's a strength because that person's so solid and steady that sometimes that's the person that's what we need. That's the context that we need. And that's the person you go to. And another, thought that I had of this is that it's rooted somewhat. I'd love to hear what you have to say about this. So I think it's also rooted in the detail orientedness and the thinking through what could go wrong because I want to help, right? And I see things that other people don't see might go wrong. And so that, like, what we refer to as weak central coherence, in other words, seeing details instead of seeing the 360 view of the room, is a strength. And it is true that those things could go wrong. But what might be missing is some other details that other people are seeing that would even that out and make it more flexible. I don't know. Do you see that as a contributor? I just keep thinking that I really feel like it does kind of
Yeah.
create that more inflexibility sometimes.
Yes, I think so. And especially when you have emotional pain or memories that were really difficult, that were connected to one of those details, and then you kind of hyperfixate on those specific details, and you get good at predicting when that's going the wrong way. And you kind of put your foot down and try to keep it in bounds. And yeah, it can come across really harsh, I think, sometimes, even just depending on the way it's communicated. I'm also thinking about flexibility in terms of like church life. So I've talked to a lot of autistic believers who are like, oh my gosh, I showed up at church this week and all of the chairs were in a different configuration and I didn't know where to sit. And that meant that I couldn't sit where I needed to sit so that the sound doesn't bother me, because if I sit in certain
Mm.
station, then the sound really hurts my ears. And I ended up sitting next to this person who was so distracting because they were wearing this strong smell, and like, it just can kind of snowball from there. And so I've even let some church leaders know, hey, if you're going to change something major this Sunday, could you if you know you have autistic church members or people who really appreciate and need that predictability, could you even give them the heads up so that they can prepare emotionally for walking into a room that's different?
Yeah. Yeah. Like, couldn't we plan this out a week ahead of time and say, next week when you come in, and if you would like to sit away from the noise, or you can either plan that out for yourself or get the opportunity to talk to somebody about, your needs and advocate, but just walking in is a real shock to the whole nervous system,
Yeah.
right? It's not just a brain thing, it's the whole nervous system response.
Yeah. If you have challenges around flexibility, it can lead to this kind of idea of, well, there's one right way to do everything. And then that translates to faith, where it's like, well, this is the way God heals, or this is the way God speaks. And then I look at the life of Jesus, even the way that Jesus healed blind people, and there's different stories. One blind person, he just speaks to him. The next one,
Yeah.
and the next one, he makes spit and mud
Yeah.
on his eyes, which for me sounds like a sensory nightmare. But like,
Yeah.
I'm not able even to take in the creativity of God if I'm super inflexible in my mindset around something. And that can be a real challenge.
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah, because it's the way I worship is the right way and the way you worship is the wrong way. And that doesn't really bode well, for most situations. And again, it falls back into that person being labeled as being bulldozing or being hard to be with or being judgmental or difficult, right? And I think a lot of that is that we're judging somebody based on what their external behaviors are showing rather than connecting with them on the inside. I I think for those of us with a little more awareness, we see the behavior and then we're like, ooh, wonder what's happening inside. But that's taken time and life experience, even, to get to that kind of compassion. You mentioned some kind of antidotes or strategies of, pre-planning, and some that came up for me were like, replacing the no, just building awareness for the person that might have cognitive flexibility, that or challenges with cognitive flexibility, as to whys, like what is happening, what situations are hard, and what kind of accommodations would help you. Would you like to ask for them? I think it's a team kind of thing where it's not just the community and the church's responsibility. It can be everybody's responsibility to work together to create healthier environments, but also to just ask for what you need. So learning to say perhaps, because you process information a little slower and your go-to is going to be no, but that if you say perhaps, you might be able to upload some new software or rearrange a new routine that gives space for this new idea, or look at all the ideas and think, oh, wait a minute, I could see how that could work if we would, shift a few things around. It could be safe, right? An example that kind of came up for me around this idea of cognitive inflexibility is just the simplest serving, even at home. I had a client I worked with where just his morning routine was so solid that no one in the family could ask for a quick, can you help me, without it a really hard no that turned into a lot of hurt and a lot of arguing. And so just a really authentic conversation about, well, what would it be like to restructure your routine and actually account for about 15 minutes of downtime that people would be able to ask you. And just the awareness and then that suggestion of reorganization was enough to start to create some cognitive flexibility for both sides, for the family and for the person that was kind of living in the land of no, is what I call it.
Yeah. And one thing I would suggest there is that when either if it's me trying to think about maybe there's another way I could do this, or when we're suggesting that to someone who has challenges with cognitive flexibility, you want to do your best to have the person who's trying on a new thought be in a regulated, calm state, because there's going to be a lot more openness to even consider something different rather than when we're in that kind of fight or flight defended state.
Well, yeah. So your example of walking in and all the church seating is in a different place, and that is not the time for that conversation, right? And I appreciate you saying that so much, because I get this privilege of meeting with people one-on-one. I'm not usually in their personal life, which makes me safer. We're on a computer screen. So I'm always like, if you are done with me, you literally could shut your laptop or hit the power button, which brings with it, we have built relationship. That's what we're there to talk about, these kind of things. And there's some level of safety. And so those things need to be present before it's much better to look at what you can control, whether that's you're the person that can help with the environment, or you're the person that can think about what you need, than it is to just, like you said, be talking to somebody who may be dysregulated about how they could change. That rarely goes well. Rarely. I don't know that it's ever gone well, but let's just leave room for possibility.
Well, let's move then to the next category, which is this metacognition, which is a big word, self-awareness. It's the ability to think about what we think, to think about what we know, and to think about what we do, and to think about an idea and a situation. Like, it includes the awareness of what you're good at and what is challenging for you. So this can be really hard for people to reference themselves and be aware of their behavior and their thought patterns and their needs and their strengths and their challenges.
Yeah, I love this one. I don't know if you're one of those people like I am that hears a word and you're like, I like that word. Metacognition, it's such an interesting word. Or thinking about what you think, knowing what you think about what you think is such a kind of catchy definition. It's interesting as I thought about this, and again, I cannot back this one up with research either. So this podcast might just revolve around what I cannot back up with research, but observation. Being neurodivergent tends to live in this land of extremes, which is why we're different than the majority, right? So it's like you're either really self-aware, that's my observation, which tends to fall into more of that ADHD category. Again, observation that I can't back up with research. Or awareness is really hard for you. And that I tend to see more with autistic people, or ADHD people, as we know, could fall on either end of that spectrum, depending on the day or the moment. And both can be a strength, and both can be a challenge, depending on, the context.
Yeah, and you even mentioned in the book, as you're a neurodiverse couples coach, you said it's typical to meet a couple where one person has strong metacognition or strong self-awareness, and where another person does not want to talk about what they did well or might need to do differently or improve.
Oh, yeah. Or there's just almost like this rejection sensitivity around the possibility that I did any of it wrong, or I just don't see that I did it wrong because given the data that I had, I did everything completely right. Or I might have missed some signals that it was awkward or uncomfortable for other people. There's so many reasons, but it's basically, as a strength, the ability to really self-examine and be really radically honest before God and other people. As a strength, these are like the deeply reflective people who have a strong inner state, like this strong awareness and desire for authenticity. And that can sound really good, but they're also the people who are quick to call things out in a group. And maybe it might seem inappropriate to the group, or the context or whoever. And they're just like the truth teller saying like, well, this is what I see, because they're spending so much time in, default mode network, right? Like that network where we are doing our self-reflection and our creativity. That's an area where if you are the person, and that's why I think I see it more in ADHD, you spend a lot of time in that area of your brain that you're coming out with all of these, this awareness of yourself, awareness of others, awareness of a whole situation, and the strengths and challenges. What did I do right in that situation? What could I have done better? What did that person do right? What could they have done better? So that's that area where I think, it can be that over-awareness can be a strength. It can be a challenge because you usually tend to be the overthinker, or what we would say, the ruminator, the person who's stressed out.
And even as I hear you talk about that, in some church traditions, those people who see what's happening and call it out would be called prophets, or are called someone with a prophetic gifting. And I've noticed that can be a real strength. And also it requires discernment and wisdom to know when to speak and when to be silent, when to fight the battle and when to not die on this hill, that kind of thing. I'm also thinking on the other extreme, if I have a real problem with metacognition, if I have a real difficulty with self-awareness, that could lean into, or it could be coded as spiritual blindness. What we read often in the Old Testament, it seems like people were spiritually blind because they couldn't see that what they were doing was hurting other people or was breaking God's law or whatever the case may be. And so it seems like there's really, for a healthy relationship with God and a healthy spirituality, we have to be willing to see ourselves, and we have to be humble enough to see ourselves and to recognize that our perspective might not be the only perspective. And then we've got to not be self-absorbed, which could be on the other end. If I'm so self-aware that all I can see and reference is myself, that's a problem too, right?
Yes.
What thoughts come up as you hear me talk about that?
It can be seen as spiritual blindness. It also can be seen as a blindness for serving and caring about other people,
Yeah.
right? Because um, interrupting on either end of that strength or challenge is seen as not thinking about others, right? Not caring about others, or not having the awareness of yourself in space to know what are you what are you giving or what are you not giving, is what are the norms of this social situation or this church community, right? Is also a social situation. What are the norms, what are the expectations, and how am I caring for those around me? Or am I only thinking about myself, or I'm not thinking about anybody at all? Do I get up and just leave a situation when I'm uncomfortable, regardless of, what someone else is sharing with me? And then when you approach me and talk to me about something I did, then do I deny it, or do I listen humbly and receive feedback? All of that kind of ties into that ability to have metacognition and self-awareness, because if we don't have it, then when someone wants to talk to us about truth or change, it's very hard to receive, because we didn't see ourselves doing that, having that intention, or doing that behavior in that way in the first place.
Yeah. And I found that self-awareness is a muscle that can grow, that can develop.
Mm.
We're willing to put the time and energy into it. And that makes me think about how some of the work that I do sitting with people in spiritual direction is work of self-reflection, and also becoming aware of, on the other end, relationships and reflecting around relationships, all in the presence of God. And so it is deeply spiritual work, even as we're working with developing our own self-awareness. It's actually a real spiritual work that we're doing. And it's one of the places where I see spirit and brain wiring really deeply connected.
Do you use role play or any? I'm curious what kind of things. I mentioned role play because I noticed that is a real help of, let's replay this relationship, thing that happened, and then let's talk about where it went well and maybe where it could have went better. And the purpose of that is to bring it to the forefront of your brain. And then let's talk about generalizing for another time when this possibly could happen, which is also hard for neurodivergent people, for some neurodivergent people to say, well, the next time there was this sliver of information that was different, so I didn't know that I should do that there because it wasn't exactly the same as this time. So
Right.
I've noticed that that's a help, is that, we've gone through and identify strengths and challenges, and then, okay, next time, how would you even know that this was a similar situation, and how could you do it different? Are there kind of strategies that you use like that? Because I could see how that's beneficial in both relationships to people and also your own like relationship with God and community.
Yeah, for sure. One of the first things I'll do, let's say somebody brings into spiritual direction a really challenging interaction that they had at church last week, perhaps. Um, and the first thing that we'll do is we'll try to slow it down, and we'll try to reflect on and get curious about what was happening on the inside of them while this interaction is going on. So that is that self-awareness piece. What's happening in your body? What's happening in your mind? What's happening in your heart? What are the phrases that you're hearing, in your head, etc. And then how did you respond? Okay, so you were feeling uncomfortable or awkward, and then how did you respond? Okay, again, holding that in a non-judgment kind of space. And then oftentimes we'll turn to prayer in spiritual direction,
Mm.
and we'll invite Jesus to be with them in that scenario, and either to offer some wisdom about what they did well, and blessing what they did well and what they could do differently, maybe an invitation. Or sometimes I'll even invite them to imagine, okay, let's imagine that Jesus takes your place in that conversation. How does the conversation go? And is there something we could learn just by watching Jesus interact in that situation? So a variety of ways. And then yes, role playing. Um, Once they realize what was happening inside them, then we think, well, what could they have done differently? What's a different way they could have responded to that might have led to something beautiful or something more connective or whatnot, and then have them practice that. And then I'll be on the other side giving, possible responses from the other person. So yeah, there's a lot of imagination, there's prayer, there's role play. I tend to get really creative in those spaces. Fun for me, but it also seems to really help get all out of the left brain assessment and get some right brain energy involved.
I was just enjoying listening. I think it all makes sense to me. And I think you and I started before we even hit the play button or the record button, talking about how we have had experiences with that in our own lives, really, right?
Yeah.
Realizing like, whoops, I'm not sure how did that go? And just how that kind of probably guides both of our work is, that internal realization of, oh, I went into a situation and I'm not sure that went so well. And how do I build my own metacognition about that? And then leading it to helping other people. So that's when, as you were talking, that's kind of what was going through my mind.
Yeah, I've heard it said that we don't actually learn from experience, we learn from reflecting on experience. And that's something I think that we can all make space for in our lives, to just take some time to reflect by ourselves, with a therapist or a coach or a spiritual director, and or with God, reflecting on our experiences. I think that's where growth really happens. So we're going to pause there for today's conversation. Every time I get together with Robin, the conversation is just so rich that it always expands beyond the time we have allotted for it. And so this will be in two parts. We'll cover the last two elements of executive function next week in next week's episode. So stay tuned for that. And before you go, I do want to let you know that one of our listeners has recently created a Facebook group for neurodivergent faith. So if you might be interested to comment on an episode and have conversation with others who are processing some of these same things, join our Facebook group, Neurodivergent Faith Community. And we'd love to have you contribute to the conversation there, connect with others, and find another way to experience the reality that you're not alone on this journey. Thanks for listening to this episode of Neurodivergent Faith. If you like what you heard, consider subscribing, leaving a review, or sharing this with someone who might need to hear it too. And as you continue to wrestle with faith and identity, remember, your unique brain is a part of God's creative genius. Whether it's the way you process scripture, engage with prayer, or connect with others, you are a reflection of the vast creativity of our Creator. May you trust that God knows you, delights in you, and is working in you exactly as you are. And may you know that you are not walking this journey alone. See you next time.